This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week we honor the year in music for 2001 along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 2001. We also look at the newly announced inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, plus our Spotlight Hall of Fame is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame itself and why so many people on the far right are upset with it. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 2001. In music, on September 7, 2001, Michael Jackson held the first of his two 30th anniversary star-studded tribute concerts at Madison Square Garden in New York City. That same day, singer Ryan Adams recorded a music video for his song New York, New York. In the video, Ryan stood on the Brooklyn side of the East River with the skyline of Lower Manhattan behind him. Among the buildings of the skyline were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. On September 10th that year, while testifying in front of Congress about $3.2 trillion in missing defense money, U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld called the Pentagon bureaucracy the biggest threat to America. On the evening of September 10th, Michael Jackson performed the second of those 30th anniversary tribute concerts at Madison Square Garden, less than a couple miles away from the World Trade Center. The morning of September 11, 2001 started out as a pretty, relatively warm, sunny day in New York City and also in Washington, D.C. There were new album releases that day from Jay-Z, Mariah Carey, and Bob Dylan. Singer, actor, and writer Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy fame and rapper and actor Mark Wahlberg were both scheduled to be on flights out of Boston, Massachusetts, going to Los Angeles, California that morning, but both of them missed their flights. Those flights were the planes that went into the World Trade Center. The first one at 8:46 a.m. By the time the morning had ended, 4 airplanes were hijacked and crashed in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, and almost 3,000 people lost their lives. MTV and VH1 stopped playing music videos and instead played news reports from CBS News. The Latin Grammy Awards, which were scheduled, were canceled. Sting, who was beginning an internet live stream when the attack started, only played one song, his song Fragile, and then cut the stream. After the events of that day, the new century would be marked in the human consciousness by before 9/11 and after 9/11. On September 18th of that year, the anthrax terror campaign started as letters were mailed containing the deadly chemical to various news organizations and congressmen. 22 people came in contact with anthrax. 5 died as a result, including postal employees who handled the letters. For years, the person who the FBI said was the prime suspect was bioweapons expert Stephen Hatfill. However, after finally being exonerated in 2005, the FBI turned their attention to scientist and new chief suspect Bruce Edwards Ivins. Ivins committed suicide in 2007. The FBI named Ivins as the main suspect in 2008 and closed the case officially in 2010. All of the attacks added to the mounting fear and uneasiness in the country. In fact, things got so crazy that the group Anthrax had to put out a statement saying that they weren't going to change their name just because people wanted them to. Musically, concerning all of the attacks, Clear Channel Communications, one of the largest radio station owners and now better known as iHeartRadio, gave their stations a list of songs that they highly suggested should not be played. Among them were Knockin' on Heaven's Door, both the Guns N' Roses cover version and the Bob Dylan original version, Drowning Pool's Bodies, and every single song from Rage Against the Machine, which the band took as a badge of honor. A lot of songs were written about September 11th, including the Beastie Boys' An Open Letter to New York City, Beyoncé's I Was There, Mary Chapin Carpenter's Grand Central Station, Alan Jackson's Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning, and 2 songs from Sheryl Crow on her album Detours. Bruce Springsteen put out an entire album about the attacks called The Rising. There was also a charity concert held in New York City for the attack's victims. Among the acts who performed were The Who, David Bowie, and Jay-Z. The person who helped to organize the event? The man who, along with Bill Cosby, helped to jumpstart the hashtag #MeToo movement, former Miramax CEO and now convicted sexual predator Harvey Weinstein. In fact, there were at least 5 megastar charity concerts to benefit the victims of 9/11. Surprisingly, very few minority artists, aside from Jay-Z and Michael Jackson, were invited to perform at these charity concerts. There was, however, an all-Latino charity concert called Hispanos Unidos por New York that was held on December 9th that year. Artists like Sheryl Crow and the Dave Matthews Bands either changed the songs that they were releasing around that time period, pulled certain songs off of upcoming albums, or changed album covers for upcoming releases because of the anthrax attacks and also the 9/11 attacks. The other huge world-changing music story of 2001 was one that no one at the time realized the impact that it would have, and it wouldn't even come from a musical artist. On January 9, 2001, Apple CEO Steve Jobs announced the iTunes Media Player. On October 23rd of that year, Apple released the first iPod. After those 2 events, music was never the same, for better or for worse, your choice. Other musical events of 2001 included a crowd that crushed and killed a woman during Limp Bizkit's performance at the Sydney, Australia Big Day Out Festival. Michael Jackson was found not guilty of plagiarizing an Italian songwriter's song. Sean Combs was found not guilty of the event surrounding a nightclub shooting in New York City that happened back in 1999. Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown trashed their hotel room at the Bel Air Hotel, and both were arrested because of it, along with being banned from the hotel for life. Whitney also signed a 6-album, $100 million record deal with Arista Records. Mariah Carey, not to be outdone, signed a 4-album, $80 million record deal with Virgin Records. Mariah also entered treatment for mental health issues after having a series of mental health breakdowns, including an infamous appearance on the MTV show Total Request Live. Country music legend Charlie Pride released a tribute to Jim Reeves, which was the first compact disc to have copy protection embedded into it, making it extremely difficult to copy the disc for personal use. Copy protection became a trend until MP3s completely took over music. MP3 file sharer Napster closed down after being forced to by court injunctions. By then, though, despite the music industry's better efforts, the genie had already been sprung from the bottle, and MP3s became the music vehicle of choice until streaming services cut into song and album sales in the next decade. Also in 2001, XM satellite radio started. Bands that formed in 2001 included Andian, Arcade Fire, Audioslave, The Black Keys, Dance Nation, Dirty Vegas, The Dresden Dolls, Fall Out Boy, Gabrielle and Dresden, Jet, The Killers, LCD Sound System, The Modern, Nemesis, The Postal Service, Scissor Sisters, Vinnie Vici, Seville, Sneaky Sound System, and My Chemical Romance, whose lead singer, Gerard Way, was inspired to follow his dreams and start the band after witnessing the 9/11 New York City attacks firsthand as he was crossing New York Harbor in a ferry that day. Mel C quit the Spice Girls in 2001. Jason Newsted quit Metallica. Wes Borland left Limp Bizkit. Mike Turner left Our Lady Peace. Don Felder was fired from the Eagles. Eric Singer replaced Peter Criss as drummer of Kiss. Bands that either broke up before, of course, their inevitable reunions or announced their hiatus included All Saints, the Afghan Whigs, Aqua, Babes in Toyland, Breathe, Damn Yankees, Deep Blue Something, Elastica, Groove Theory, James, L7 and 17, Orbit, Republica, Savage Garden, Semisonic, Skunk Anansi, Sunvolt, TKO, Total, Tilt, The Toadies, Twisted Sister, Escape, and Electric Light Orchestra, better known as ELO, who then reformed later in the year without original member Jeff Lynne. Other groups that reformed in 2001 or came back from their hiatus included Level 42, The Monkees, Maroon 5, Roxy Music, and Sunny Day Real Estate. Jennifer Lopez became the first female artist to have a #1 album and a #1 movie that she starred in during the same exact week when her album J-Lo and her movie The Wedding Planner both hit #1 that week. Billboard's biggest selling album of the year, though, was Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory. Other big sellers were from Shaggy, NSYNC, Janet Jackson, Enya, Stained, Alicia Keys, Destiny's Child, Creed, Gorillaz, Aerosmith, the Oh Brother Where Art Thou soundtrack, and the Now That's What I Call Music Volume 6 compilation album. Janet Jackson's song All For You was added to 3 major mainstream radio formats in its first week of release, becoming the first song to ever do that. Billboard's biggest selling song of 2001, however, was Lifehouse's Hanging by a Moment. Other big songs were Fallen from Alicia Keys, Drops of Jupiter by Train, I'm Real from Jennifer Lopez and Ja Rule, If You're Gone from Matchbox 20, Let Me Blow Your Mind from Eve and Gwen Stefani, Thank You from Dido, again from Lenny Kravitz, Independent Women from Destiny's Child, and No Doubt's Hella Good. Heavy metal was still breathing, although it had fully transformed into rap rock and pop punk with bands like Linkin Park, POD, and Sum 41 topping the charts. Big bands like Nickelback, Aerosmith, Entombed, Drowning Pool, Gwar, Tool, System of a Down, Slipknot, Slayer, Judas Priest, Megadeth, and Avenged Sevenfold all put out albums that year as well. In country music, some of the biggest albums of the year were LeAnn Rimes' I Need You, Lone Star's I'm Already There, Trisha Yearwood's Inside Out, Toby Keith's Pull My Chain, Garth Brooks' Scarecrow, George Strait's The Road Less Traveled, Tim McGraw's Set This Circus Down, Brooks and Dunn's Steers and Stripes, and greatest hits albums from Martina McBride and Reba McEntire. Best-selling country songs included Toby Keith's You Shouldn't Kiss Me Like This, I'm Just Talking About Tonight, and I Want to Talk About Me. Also, Alan Jackson's Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning, his 9/11 tribute song, and Where I Come From. Brooks and Dunn's Only in America and Ain't Nothing 'Bout You. Jamie O'Neill's There Is No Arizona and also When I Think About Angels. Lone Star's I'm Already There and also Tell Her. Kenny Chesney's Don't Happen Twice, Diamond Rio's One More Day, Tim McGraw's Angry All the Time and also Grown Men Don't Cry, and the Dixie Chicks, now known simply as the Chicks' song Without You. In hip-hop, the biggest albums of the year included DMX's The Great Depression, Tupac's Until the End of Time, Jay-Z's The Blueprint, which came out on 9/11. D12's Devil's Night, Ja Rule's Pain is Love, Nas's Stillmatic, Lil Bow Wow's Doggy Bag, Ludacris's Word of Mouth, Juvenile's Project English, and Jada Kiss's Kiss the Game Goodbye. Big singles included Outkast's Miss Jackson and also So Fresh and So Clean, Clean, Nelly's Ride With Me, EI, and #1, Jay-Z's Izzo and Girls, 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 Trick Daddy's I'm a Thug, D12's Purple Pills, Missy Misdemeanor Elliott's Get Your Freak On, Eric Sermon's Music, Ludacris's Area Codes, Fabulous's Can't Deny It, and Nas's Uchi Wally. In dance music, BPM became the first dance channel on Sirius XM, which launched that year. Despite England having a serious foot and mouth disease, insert your own joke about British politics there, the country still held its heavy slate of music festivals. Among the albums that were released in 2001, well, there was Tiesto's first solo album, In My Memory, also Paul Van Dyk's The Politics of Dancing, Daft Punk's Discovery, Jamiroquai's A Funk Odyssey, and Ministry of Sounds' The Chill Out Session. Big EDM singles included Roy De Silva and Cassandra's Touch Me, Daft Punk's Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, Roger Sanchez's Another Chance, Tiesto's remix of Delirium and Sarah McLachlan's song Silence, Io and Nadia Ali's Rapture, Faithless's We Come One, Andy C's Body Rock, Lasco's Something, Armin van Buuren's The Sound of Goodbye, Paul Van Dyk's We Are Alive, Dirty Vegas's Days Go By, which became huge after being used in a car commercial that year, Basement Jaxx's Where's Your Head At, Fatboy Slim's Song for Shelter and also Weapon of Choice, and the Chemical Brothers' It Began in Africa, and Star Guitar. The top 10 DJs on DJ Mags' Top 100 DJs poll for the year were John Digweed, Sasha, Danny Tenaglia, Paul Van Dyk, Paul Oakenfold, Tiesto, Carl Cox, Mauro Picotto, Steve Lawler, and Deep Dish. Latin artists who had big 2001s included Paulina Rubio, Vicente Fernandez, A.B. Quintanilla, y Los Cumbia Kings, Lupillo Rivera, Azul Azul, Grupo Brindis, Luis Miguel, Marco Antonio Solis, Christian Castro, MDO, Jackie Velasquez, Cheyenne, Palomo, and crossover artists Ricky Martin and Christina Aguilera, who both put out Latin albums that year. Musical films and documentaries that came out in 2001 included Beijing Rocks, Glitter, Carmen, a hip opera, Hedwig and the Angry Itch, Moulin Rouge, Rockstar, and Scratch. Musicals or revival of musicals that opened on Broadway included Mamma Mia, 42nd Street, You're in Town, and The Producers, which was a smash pop culture hit, much like Hamilton was in the mid-2010s. Artists who were born in 2001 included Billie Eilish, Zach Heron of Why Don't We, Carson Luders, and Lil TJ. Singer Aaliyah was killed in a plane crash in 2001 when her small plane was overloaded with gear from a music video she was shooting in the Bahamas, and then the plane crashed shortly after takeoff from all of the weight. Other artists who passed away in 2001 included George Harrison, John Lee Hooker, Chet Atkins, John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, Joey Ramone of the Ramones, Perry Como, Les Brown of Les Brown and his Band of Renown, Melanie Thornton of La Bouche, Spanish rapper Quevedo, composer John Fahey, violinist Isaac Stern, Stuart Adamson of Big Country, Kenny Green of Intro, drummer Billy Higgins, harmonica player Larry Adler, trombonist J.J. Johnson, and Chuck Schuldiner of Death. In award ceremonies for the music of 2001, at the Grammy Awards, the Oh Brother Where Art Thou movie soundtrack won Album of the Year. Also, Alicia Keys won Song of the Year for Fallen and also Best New Artist. U2 won Record of the Year for Walk On. Janet Jackson won MTV's first Icon Award at the Video Music Awards. The video for the song Lady Marmalade by Christina Aguilera, Lil' Kim, Maya, and Pink won Video of the Year, though, that year. That ceremony was also the one with Britney Spears' famous Snake Charmer performance to her song I'm a Slave for You. At the American Music Awards, Luther Vandross, Aaliyah, Sade, Enrique Iglesias, Brooks and Dunn, Faith Hill, Lenny Kravitz, Janet Jackson, NSYNC, Tim McGraw, and Limp Bizkit were the big winners. At the Billboard Music Awards, Destiny's Child won Artist of the Year. Alicia Keys won Entertainer of the Year at the Soul Train Music Awards. Faith Hill, Garth Brooks, and NSYNC won the music categories at the People's Choice Awards. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Copenhagen, Denmark that year, Tanel Pater, Dave Benton, and the group 2XL from Estonia won for the song Everybody, making Dave Benton the first black person to ever win at Eurovision. Tim McGraw won Entertainer of the Year at the Country Music Association Awards, and the Dixie Chicks, now of course known as the Chicks, won Entertainer of the Year at the Academy of Country Music Awards. Dido won Best British Album for No Angel, and S Club 7 won Best Song for Don't Stop Movin' at the Brit Awards. Diana Krall won Artist of the Year and also won Best Album of the Year for The Look of Love, while Nickelback won Best Song for How You Remind Me at the Juno Awards. Powderfinger won Album of the Year for Odyssey No. 5 and also won Single of the Year for My Happiness at the ARIA Music Awards. At the Tony Awards, The Producers won Best Musical, winning 12 Tony Awards out of 15 nominations. 42nd Street won Best Revival of a Musical. The Pulitzer Prize for Music was won by John Corigliano for Symphony No. 2. Musically at the Academy Awards, Randy Newman won Best Song for If I Didn't Have You from the movie Monsters, Inc., and Howard Shore won Best Original Score for The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings. P.J. Harvey won the Mercury Music Prize for the album Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea. The 2001 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on March 19th at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted guitarist James Burton and pianist Johnny Johnson into the Sidemen category. Island Records founder Chris Blackwell was inducted into the non-performers category. And in the performers category, the Hall inducted Aerosmith, Solomon Burke, Michael Jackson, the Flamingos, Paul Simon, Richie Valens, Steely Dan, and this next group. Back in the late 1960s, while in art college, young Farouk Bulsara became friends with bassist Tim Staffel, who was in a band called Smile at the time. Farouk became a fan of the band and ended up joining them when Staffel left the band to form another band. Farouk joined the band and did 2 name changes at that time. The first was that he persuaded the rest of the members of the band, guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, to change their name from Smile to Queen. The second was that Farouk Bulsara changed his name to Freddie Mercury. Queen played with different bassists for a couple of years until they found the perfect bassist in John Deacon. In 1973, the band signed a record deal and released their debut album, Queen. The critics liked the progressive metal sound of the band, but the public didn't find the album, even with the now well-known lead single from that album, Keep Yourself Alive. Their second album, Queen 2, found success both with the critics and with the general public. That album had the classic 7 Seas of Rye on it. In 1974, the band released Sheer Heart Attack, which gave them even bigger success with songs like Killer Queen, Now I'm Here, and Stone Cold Crazy. Album number 4 came around in 1975. That album, A Night at the Opera, became a worldwide smash. The album had the hits Love of My Life, You're My Best Friend, and another song that would chart top 10 3 times in America. The second time with the help of a movie about 2 kids with a cable access TV show, and a third time with the help of an Academy Award-winning performance. According to historians, some of the ideas for the song Bohemian Rhapsody were formulated in the late 1960s, especially the beginning part where the singer of the song talks about the fact that he just killed a man. The song, all planned out by Freddie beforehand, starts with a 49-second intro, then goes into an almost 2-minute ballad, then Brian May's 25-second guitar solo, then the 1-minute opera that everybody and their grandmother loves singing, especially in a car, then a quick little 47-second rock portion, and has a 1-minute ending. All totaled, it is a 5-minute, 55-second mini rock opera about a guy who accidentally kills a guy, sold his soul to the devil, then called God up to help save him. That would be the opera portion in the center. The band started recording the song in late August 1975, and it took about 3 weeks to do it. They had rehearsed it for 3 weeks beforehand. They layered over 100 different tracks onto the song. Brian May's guitar solo, however, is all him, one track only. The record label, as you can imagine, was not pleased with a 6-minute song. They thought it didn't fit into the cookie-cutter 4 minutes or less corporate radio world, so the band took the song to Capitol Radio DJ Kenny Everett, who played it on his station. He teased it first by playing little bits of it until the public wanted more. It then got picked up by other radio stations, and after that, Queen's record label Elektra released the song on October 31st, 1975. The song Bohemian Rhapsody became a huge hit, especially in England, where it went to number 1. In America, it went top 10, number 9 to be precise, in its initial run. The song sold over 30 million copies worldwide to date. The music video that was made for the song is also considered a template for how music videos were made, at least back in the 1970s. The song has been popularized a few more times. The first was during the unfortunate early death of Freddie Mercury from the complications of AIDS in 1991, when it finally hit number 1 in America when it was released with the song These Are the Days of Our Lives as a double A-side single in late 1991. The second was when a movie called Wayne's World, about 2 guys who had a cable access TV show, used the song in the now famous headbanging in the car scene. The third was a few years ago when the band's biopic Bohemian Rhapsody, with a Best Picture Academy Award-winning performance by Rami Malek as the late great Freddie Mercury, took the song back to the top 10 in the UK. After that, the band became dominant through the late 1970s and into the early 1980s with albums A Day at the Races, News of the World, Jazz, The Game, The Works, and A Kind of Magic. They also had hit soundtracks for the movies Flash Gordon, Iron Eagle, and Highlander. Of course, if you saw the movie, then you know that the band's popularity started to go down in America as New Wave took over the industry. As a matter of fact, even though a bunch of their songs are now considered classics and are classic radio rock staples in America, those songs were not exactly hugely popular when they were originally released, much like a lot of songs these days that are considered some of the greatest songs ever written. Regardless of how they were perceived commercially and on the charts in America, they were still a huge touring draw and hugely popular in England, continuously racking up top 10 albums and singles, while in America they weren't doing so great. See their legendary performance at Live Aid as proof of their popularity in the UK. Freddie's health started to deteriorate from the effects of the AIDS virus as he fronted the band's final couple of albums in the early 1990s. You can see the beating his body took in the band's video for the song These Are the Days of Our Lives. Watching him will leave more than a few tears in your eyes. After Freddie's death on November 24th, 1991, the band held a tribute concert at Wembley Stadium, site of their legendary Live Aid performance. Then the group marched on with several different singers, including Robbie Williams from Take That, before finally landing on American Idol contestant Adam Lambert. They've been touring ever since, although bassist John Deacon retired from the band in 1997, although he is still the group's financial advisor. Queen are one of the biggest selling musical artists of all time, with claimed sales of up to 300 million copies, and are the third best-selling band in England, right after the Beatles, of course, and the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stone magazine voted Freddie the second greatest frontman of all time and the 18th greatest singer of all time, while voting the band the 52nd greatest artists of all time. Queen put out 14 studio albums during Freddie's tenure as frontman, along with 2 live albums, 2 greatest hits albums, and 2 box sets. There have been a bunch of all of those different types of albums that have been released since Freddie passed away, in order, of course, to cash in on the group's legacy. Of the albums that were released while Freddie was alive, 5 hit the top 10 in America, with 1980's The Game hitting number 1. In the UK, it's a completely different story, with 17 albums hitting the top 10, including 9 hitting number 1. As far as singles that were released while Freddie was alive, 53 were released, with 5 hitting the top 10 in America, including Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Another One Bites the Dust, and the aforementioned 1991 re-release of Bohemian Rhapsody, all hitting number 1. In the UK, again, a completely different story, as they had 20 songs hit the top 10, including 4 number 1s. Presented for induction by the late great Taylor Hawkins of 2022 inductees, the Foo Fighters, and Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, and also 2014 inductees Nirvana, Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon. Queen, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, class of 2001, and we have put selections from their greatest hits albums on this week's playlist for the podcast, the link of which is in the show notes. Before we go any further, we'd like to tell you that there is now a Music History In-Depth podcast where we go more in-depth on a few of the events that happened in music history for that particular week. The Music History In-Depth podcast drops every Tuesday on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from, as does our Music History Today podcast, which goes over the daily events in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops daily, including weekends, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to this podcast. The next class of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has finally been announced. In the performers category, the inductees are the Dave Matthews Band, Cher, Peter Frampton, Ozzy Osbourne, Mary J. Blige, Foreigner, A Tribe Called Quest, and Kool and the Gang. Left out of the performers category this year were nominees Oasis, Sade, Lenny Kravitz, Mariah Carey, Jane's Addiction, Eric B. and Rakim, and Sinead O'Connor. There were some other inductees announced as well. Jimmy Buffett, Dionne Warwick, the original punk rock pioneering group MC5, and Motown Records pioneer Norman Whitfield, who helped to craft the Motown sound with Motown founder Berry Gordy, were all inducted into the Musical Excellence category. In the Musical Influence category, John Mayall of John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers fame, the godfather of the British blues, Alexis Corner, and Big Mama Thornton were all inducted, although I could have sworn that Big Mama Thornton was inducted years ago. Oh well. The Ahmet Ertegun Non-Performer Award category goes to Motown Records businesswoman, music and TV producer, Suzanne DePass. First, my thoughts on this list, and then my thoughts as to why this list is the way that it is and why so many people seem to be upset with it. I think that the list is actually a really good one. There was only going to be one rap group to be inducted, so Tribe got the nod on that one. There was only going to be one R&B singer who was going to be inducted into the performers category. I personally would have gone with Mariah, but Mary is deserving. After all, she is the queen of hip-hop soul. I had a feeling that when Peter Frampton did his cameo appearance last year when Sheryl Crow was being inducted, that he was going to be inducted this year. It tends to work out that way. If you want a sneak peek as to who will probably be nominated for next year's class, then watch the upcoming ceremony for this year, which will be live on the Disney Plus streaming service on October 29th. This year, the ceremony is being held in Cleveland, not in New York City. Foreigner had a big push from insiders for the past couple of years, so it doesn't shock me that they made it in. Same with Dave Matthews and Ozzy, who's already in as a member of Black Sabbath, but who fully, absolutely deserves to be inducted as a solo artist. The Hall seems to put in one R&B group every year now, so Kool and the Gang are it. There you go. I am, however, really sad that Sinead, Sade, and Oasis didn't make it in, but those are my personal favorites. Congratulations to all of the inductees. In the next segment, I'll explain why some people, especially the ones on the far right, are upset with the list, judging from all of the YouTube videos I've seen over the past week. Normally in this part of the podcast, we talk about another Hall of Fame or Walk of Fame. This week, though, we're going to talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, mainly because of the fact that they've just announced their newest inductees. The Hall Foundation was actually established on April 20th, 1983. Former Atlantic Records executive Ahmet Ertegun was the head at the time. 3 years later, a committee chose Cleveland, Ohio to be the site of the physical location of the museum over the cities of Detroit, New York City, Philadelphia, Memphis, and Cincinnati. I say physical museum because members were being inducted into the hall for almost a decade before the building was opened, starting back in 1986. Cleveland was chosen due to what DJ Alan Freed did to promote rock and roll, including mainstreaming the phrase rock and roll, which was originally black slang for sex, and for holding the first rock and roll concert in Cleveland, even if that concert only lasted for literally 2 minutes. Check out my music history in-depth podcast on this channel for that story. Ground was broken for the building on June 7, 1993. It opened officially on September 1st, 1995. The hall gets over 400,000 visitors a year on average. Basic hours seem to be daily from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Ticket prices seem to be $35 for adults, with children 6 through 12 paying $25. Members, high school students, service members, and people from the Cleveland area all get different prices. Plus, its normal hours and ticket prices tend to shift throughout the year, so it's always best to check their website, rockhall.com, that's rockhall.com, for more information, because everything seems to be seasonal, which is why I keep saying the word seems to be when it comes to their hours of operation and ticket prices. They always seem to change every 3 months or so. And we'll put that link in the show notes for you. Now, I debated putting this segment out as one of those emergency pods that everybody does whenever something major happens, since last week's podcast was already done and in the can, as they say, when the list was announced during American Idol on April 21st. However, I wanted to gather my thoughts on the final list and do a more thorough analysis as to certain aspects of the hall, instead of one of those ranting podcasts and YouTube videos complaining yet again about hip-hop and R&B being included, etc., etc. Therefore, these are my very clear, concise thoughts on the matter, albeit a week later. There's also not going to be a Spotlight Hall of Fame this week because the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in the spotlight, and deservedly so. I should first mention my history with music before I mention the list, so you know where all my thoughts are coming from and why some of what's being said about the hall and its new members is a little personal to me. First and foremost, I am a Gen Xer, born in 1966 actually. I've been a lifelong musician ever since I picked up a trumpet at the age of 8. I can play at least 10 different instruments, most of them barely, by the way, and most of them being brass and wind instruments, along with the drums on occasions. I went to college for music education and was extremely dismayed by what I can only describe as snobbish attitudes by both the faculty and a lot of my fellow students who thought that the only true musical art forms were classical and jazz and that everything else sucked. especially rap music, which got popular about midway through college when Run DMC and the Beastie Boys broke through. I got so dismayed because of the attitude and also because of the racism that I felt at the school. Yes, I am black, don't let the voice fool you. That I actually wanted to quit school, but my mother, of course, told me to stay in, so since she was footing the bill, I did, unfortunately. This was a northern school, by the way, in case some of you automatically thought that the racism was only in the southern schools. It's not. After college, I ran record stores for over a decade and have been in the entertainment industry behind the scenes ever since, although it's mainly been in TV, film, and photography for the last 20 years or so. When I wanted to quit school way back when, I actually wanted to go to broadcasting school and work in radio. Technology finally caught up with my dream 30 years later when podcasting became accessible to everyone, so this is what I do and why I do it. I also have a lifelong love affair with music, which I care deeply and extremely passionately about. This doesn't make me an expert by any stretch of the imagination. There are other people who work directly in the industry who have great podcasts, who put out records or work behind the scenes as technical people. However, my music education degree, at least now, comes in handy, especially by doing all these podcasts. So, now that I've explained myself, you'll know where my following analysis comes from. Here's a quick stat for you. Including the announced class for this year, there are now 1,012 members individually in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Guess how many of them are women? 89. That's it. There's a reason for that, and a reason why, until recently, there weren't also a lot of R&B artists or other minorities in the hall, save for maybe the early rock and roll guys. That reason has a name, and his name is Jan Wenner. Jan Wenner was the head of Rolling Stone magazine and chairman of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at one time. Both institutions have taken criticism over the decades for the perception of being both racist and sexist. Turns out that criticism was actually kind of warranted. Even though Jan had stepped down from running the hall back in 2019 when John Sykes of iHeartMedia took over, Jan was still on the board of directors. That all changed in September of 2023. When Jan was out promoting his newest book called The Masters about rock and roll music greats like Springsteen and Dylan, he gave an unfortunate interview to the New York Times. When the interviewer called him out on the fact that there were no black artists or women in his book, he said, well, I'll read you the exchange in full so you know exactly what he said. Interviewer: there are 7 subjects in the new book, 7 white guys. In the introduction, you acknowledge that performers of color and women performers are just not in your zeitgeist, which to my mind is not plausible for Jan Wenner. Janis Joplin, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Nicks, Stevie Wonder, the list keeps going. Not in your zeitgeist? What do you think is the deeper explanation for why you interviewed the subjects you interviewed and not other subjects? Jan: well, let me just... Interviewer: Carole King, Madonna, there are a million examples. Jan: when I was referring to the zeitgeist, I was referring to black performers, not to the female performers, okay? Just to get that accurate. The selection was not a deliberate selection. It was kind of intuitive over the years. It just fell together that way. The people had to meet a couple criteria, but it was just kind of my personal interest and love of them. Insofar as the women, just none of them were as articulate enough on this intellectual level. Interviewer: oh, stop it. You're telling me Joni Mitchell is not articulate enough on an intellectual level? Jan: hold on a second. Interviewer: I'll let you rephrase that. Jan: all right, thank you. It's not that they're not creative geniuses. It's not that they're inarticulate, though go have a deep conversation with Grace Slick or Janis Joplin. Please, be my guest. Just a quick aside here. Good luck having a conversation with Janis Joplin because she's been dead since the 70s. Anyway, back to Jan. You know, Joni was not a philosopher of rock and roll. She didn't, in my mind, meet that test. Not by her work, not by other interviews she did. The people I interviewed were the kind of philosophers of rock. Of black artists, Stevie Wonder, genius, right? I suppose when you use a word as broad as masters, the fault is using that word. Maybe Marvin Gaye or Curtis Mayfield? I mean, they just didn't articulate on that level. Interviewer: how do you know if you didn't give them a chance? Jan: because I read interviews with them. I listened to their music. I mean, look at what Pete Townsend was writing about, or Jagger, or any of them. They were deep things about a particular generation, a particular spirit, and a particular attitude about rock and roll. Not that the others weren't, but these were the ones that could really articulate it. Interviewer: don't you think it's possible more to do with your own interests as a fan and a listener than anything particular to the artist? I think the problem is when you start saying things like they or these artists can't. Really, it's a reflection of what you're interested in more than any ability or inability on the parts of these artists, isn't it? Jan: that was my number one thing. The selection was intuitive. It was what I was interested in. Just for public relations' sake, maybe I should have gone and found one black or one woman artist to include here that didn't measure up to that same historical standard, just to avert this kind of criticism, which I get it. I had a chance to do that. Maybe I'm old-fashioned and I don't give a you-know-what, or whatever. I wish in retrospect I could have interviewed Marvin Gaye. Maybe he'd have been the guy. Maybe Otis Redding, had he lived, would have been the guy. End quote. And interview. That was enough for John Sykes to finally get rid of Jan, who was forcibly bounced from all aspects of the Hall of Fame. As an aside, by the way, Stevie Wonder is a pretty philosophical guy, as were Ray Charles, also Curtis Mayfield, and a ton of other black artists. As for women, there's tons of great thinkers who could have easily have made this book. Jan came off about as well in the interview as Los Angeles Dodgers GM Al Campanis' interview with Ted Koppel on the TV news show Nightline way back when. See, Al was discussing why there were no black managers in Major League Baseball at the time. Al's answer was that black people didn't have the, quote, mental capacity to be leaders, end quote. Ted took the show to commercial so that Al could realize what he had just said, take a minute to breathe, and then come back and rephrase his answer better on the other side of the break. Did Al do that? No, he doubled down, actually. Plus, all of this was actually on Jackie Robinson Day, which is the annual celebration of the day that Jackie Robinson became the first black player in Major League Baseball. So, really bad timing to get all racist. Al lost his job the very next day. Since John Sykes had taken over, he tried to make up for the old white guys club mentality that the Hall had seemed to have taken over the decades when Jan was in business. That is why you saw more diversification in the inductees over the past few years. In this day and age, though, that doesn't exactly sit well with the usual suspects on the far right, who think that rock wasn't influenced by black artists or that a woman's place is definitely not in the Hall. And boy, have these people come out of the woodwork in the past week with accusations of the Hall being, quote, woke, end quote. using affirmative action in their choices, or everybody's new catchphrase, diversity, equality, and inclusion programs, otherwise known these days as DEI. In fact, I'm surprised that some anti-DEI activists like Elon Musk haven't tried to get a law passed that says that the hall can only induct old white guys because anyone else, it would actually discriminate against white guys. It seems to be the way, unfortunately, these days, especially when dealing with rock fans who think that they were the ones who invented the genre and they're the only ones who ever played it. Spoiler alert, they didn't invent it, and last I checked, there's plenty of black artists who played rock music. Some guy named Jimi Hendrix, for starters. I heard he was actually halfway good. Sort of decent. If there is one fault that you could say about the hall under John Sykes' leadership, it's that the nominees, regardless of who they've been lately, are more, for lack of a better phrase, radio-friendly and less radical, with the exception of MC5, who are definitely not radio-friendly and were extremely radical. As a matter of fact, their politics weren't left of center, they were left of center. For the most part, though, the hall seems to be missing, its spark, its rebelliousness. It would have been perfect for someone like Sinead to have gotten in, or even Oasis. The hall needs people who push buttons, who make people think, who don't play by the rules, who always cause trouble. That's what rock and roll's all about. Hell, that's what music is all about. And that is what the hall seems to be missing right now. It is not, contrary to the trolls on YouTube, about hip-hop or R&B or about women. The hall needs more rebels. A lot of these inductees, as great as they are and as much as I love each and every single one of them, and I really do, it's a great list. But these inductees seem way too, for lack of another word, corporate. In fact, Foreigner was at one time considered what they used to call back in the 70s and 80s corporate rock. The hall now seems to want to stretch the boundaries, but also play it safe at the same time, and you cannot have it both ways. Either put in some artists who make you feel and make you think and stir a little something in you, or say screw it, just go all suit and tie and be known as the corporate Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Please, Hall, just choose between one or the other. But I do hope that you choose to go with more rebellious inductees next time. Might I suggest putting Oasis and Sinead in there finally? In any event, congratulations again to the newest Hall inductees. You all deserve to be in this year. The Music Halls of Fame podcast is part of the Music History Today network, which can be found under Music History Today on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and also on our YouTube page under Music History Today. Thank you very much for listening.